What's up, guys? So in this video, I want to break down for you how I went from running a 5K in 2018 to running a 250-mile race just 5 years later. And so I'm going to be walking you through the path that I took and stay till the end because I'm going to talk through how a 240-mile race actually ended up turning into 250 miles and some takeaways that I had from that experience running for 91 hours. So, guys, I wanted to break this down because I follow a lot of runners out there. I follow a lot of people working towards qualifying for Boston or doing other ultra endurance feats. Like running 200-mile races or 100-mile races or even fast marathons. And one of the questions that I always ask myself is how did they get there? Because it's hard for us to know the path that they took. We just see them where they're at now, and we don't see them in their progression. And so I wanted to walk through for you my progression to help you give you some insight on what it took, what my journey was. And this is not to say that you have to follow the exact same step and process, but it will give you some insight because I get a lot of questions about this on social media. And also, it will show you why I'm qualified to give some of the advice that I give, or, why you may want to listen to me. And I don't have any sort of sports science degree or certificates for coaching or whatnot. But what I do have is experience. And I believe 100% through and through that experience is the best teacher because you can think about it, you can read about running a marathon or an ultra marathon or listen to a ton of podcasts from David Goggins on mindset and other things like that. But until you do it, until you actually put your feet to the pavement and go for it, you're not going to know what it's like. And so, my running journey, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, a suburb called Upper Arlington. And one of the big things about Upper Arlington is in third grade, I started playing lacrosse because it's a big, big deal in UA for everyone to play lacrosse. Like the majority of people do. We were state champions multiple years. Like that's the reputation is Upper Arlington's good at lacrosse. So I started playing from a young age. But the reason I say this is because going into high school, I had lacrosse tryouts. And one of the things about lacrosse tryouts at Upper Arlington High School was during the first week of tryouts, you had to go through this week process called Hell Week. And it's not SEAL training, but they called it Hell Week because it was, what the name implies. And part of this is because there's so much conditioning throughout the entire week. Every practice started out with a 5K run. We had to do a timed mile. It was just a ton of conditioning, and you're coming off the off season, so it's pretty rough. But as a if incoming freshman, I had heard about this 5K that we had to do, and just like everyone else, man, I was dreading it so much. I did not want to do it at all. But one of the things that I found when I actually did it, when we actually, tryouts came around, despite being so nervous, I realized I was actually pretty good at it. I realized that I could actually hang with some of the seniors in that process of running this 5K. And whether it's because I was actually a great runner or other people weren't trying as hard because it was the first thing we did during tryouts and they didn't want to wear themselves out. Who knows? But I think it was a combination of the two. But that doesn't matter because what that did, despite other people's actions, is it gave me confidence because I found something that I was actually good at. And one of the things with humans, and I'm sure you've experienced this before, is you gravitate towards what you're good at. And I was never the best athlete. I was never the fastest in sprints, but I was good at this 5K. And so by the time I was a senior in high school or junior in high school, I was winning this 5K every tryout. I'd look forward to tryouts because it was this 5K and I could be like, I could win it. and it was kinda like my thing. And so senior year rolls around, and I'm talking with a buddy, and, he throws out the idea that he's thinking about running a half marathon. And it was something that I had been thinking about as well, because every year growing up, my mom has run a marathon, and she's run a marathon every year for the past 30 years. And what's crazy about that is she actually never really talked about it. I mean, she did it. She'd want us to come to the finish line sometimes to see her, but she never like bragged about it. She never shared that much about it. She never forced or even suggested any of me and my two older brothers to run, but I saw her example and it gave me a picture of possibility. And so that's just the power of a good example. Man, a good example is worth so much more than any sort of words or encouragement that you can give. But by leading by example, you're able to give people a picture of possibility. And that's what my mom did for me. So by the time that senior year came around, my friend suggests or is thinking about doing this half marathon. I'm like, oh, well, I want to do one. I'm going to do it. So I signed up right there for a half marathon in September of 2018, and I went, drove to this Air Force base. We did a half marathon, and it was challenging. But after I finished it, a couple minutes later, I actually felt pretty fine. And at that moment, I was like, man, if I didn't think that I could do it before I did it, and I forgot to mention that I had several people, kind of throw some doubt unintentionally towards me, just like wondering, "Hey, Pierce, have you ever done this before? What's the longest you've ran before this? Do you know how to hydrate? Do you know how to fuel? This, that, and the other." And I didn't know any of those things. I was just winging it. And so it caused me to doubt myself a little bit. And so, I mean, thank God that I just went for it anyway, because after that half marathon, I think I ran it in like an hour and 43 minutes. And I was like, man, if I didn't think that I could do this before, but I did, and I didn't die. What else can I do? What else is possible? And so it sparked this belief of what else is possible that propelled me onto the next step. And so a couple months later, I ran a full marathon with actually that friend that had thought about doing the half marathon. And then the following summer, 2019, going into college, I did a half Ironman just with my cousin, had no clue what I was doing, trained the best I could, but didn't even have a coach for that. Looking back on it, I definitely would have gotten a coach. And then during that summer after that half Ironman going into college, I stumbled across this book called Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And the really cool thing about this book is it just like my mom, was an example for me and gave me a picture of possibility, because David Goggins in that book talks about how he ran 100 miles without really even training for it. He just wanted to do something and he needed to qualify for this race by running in a 100-mile race and didn't have much time to train for it. So just went for it and he finished it. And it's crazy because I was like, man, this guy did it without training. I could probably do it with training. And I don't know where that delusional belief came from, but probably because a similar thing happened with the marathon, even though I trained for it. And so I just went for it. And I didn't go for 100 miles right away, but I thought I'm at USC later that fall and I'm like, man, I'd love to raise some money for a charity. You know, mental health is big in my life. I'd struggled with mental health around that time in high school and college, and I was looking for a purposeful cause to raise money for, and also selfishly, I wanted to go for this ultra marathon, and so I decided to chart a 1.02 mile loop around the University of Southern California's campus, or 1.08 miles, and I decided I'm like, well, if I run the loop every 15 minutes, I'll run it 4 times every hour, and then for 12 hours, I'll do 48 loops. And since it's 1.08 miles, I'll do 52 miles by the end of the day, all said and done. And I had no clue what I was doing. I had scraped together like some tailwind. I had heard that it was good for fueling from my cousin. I had water. I had different people sit with my gear because I had to leave it outside on this table. And I was leaving this loop every 15 minutes to run. But I'd see it a lot of times, so I was figuring no one would steal anything. And throughout the end of the day, I had different people run with me, and I was able to raise just I think under $1,000, which for me in college at the time was like, whoa! So many people came through and supported it. It was so cool. And then yeah, I did it. And one of the things that I want to encourage you with is the more you do, the more confidence that you have to do more. And it works in specific like areas of your life. Like if you're able to accomplish a lot in one certain field in business or in your career, gives you confidence to go tackle bigger and harder things. Once I accomplished a half marathon, it gave me more confidence to accomplish a full marathon, then a half Ironman, then this 52-mile race. And you learn and stack so much experience through the process. And that's why I said earlier, I don't think it really matters. I mean, yes, I could learn some things from getting a certificate or things like that, but I think I'm going to learn the most by actually doing what I want to do and what I want to help other people do. After that 52-mile race, I was like, "Man, I should do one of these every semester." And I forgot to mention I did this during exam study days, and so it was like "Hey, don't stress too much about your exams, like, you're gonna be fine. Only your first job is gonna look at your grades," and because I had seen so many people stressing and worrying way more than they should have, and so yeah, I did the 52-mile loop, and then my next race, the next semester, actually COVID happened, so it sent me home and to back to Ohio from college, but I'm like, "Man, I'm just gonna do it anyway," and, I remember I wanted to do 100 miles, but my mom, like, begged me. I was living at home at the time. My mom begged me to only do 60, and so I'm like, "Alright, I'll just take another step, and I'll go for 60," because she was worried, and that's something that you're also gonna experience along this journey is that sometimes you'll experience some of the people closest to you almost feel like they're hating or they're like doubting you. And a lot of times it's because they really care. Like looking back on it, it was annoying at the time and it was frustrating. But my mom really just cared. My family just really cared. They didn't want me to get hurt because I mean they'd never run a 52-mile race, a 60-mile race, or probably even known someone that had done one. So in their mind, they're catastrophizing all these things that could happen wrong. But one of the good barometers that I've learned on how to filter advice is I only listen to advice from people who are where I want to be. And I'll say that again. I only listen to advice from people who are where I want to be. Meaning, I'm not going to listen to advice on how to run 3 200-mile races in a year from someone who's never done that. I'm never going to listen to advice from someone who hasn't run 100 miles about running 100 miles. Right? And so that's an easy filter that I've found. It's like you wouldn't listen to a fat person about how to get skinny or ripped, and you wouldn't listen to a broke person on how to get rich, right? And so that's what I apply to my running journey. And so I end up going out doing 60 miles. I did like a 1 mile loop around my neighborhood in Columbus during COVID. It was cool because I got the news to come out. We'll see if we can throw over that news clip of when they came out for that race. Yeah, it was so cool to see other people rally together and be inspired by this feat. And so that was that was May, I believe, of 2020. And then I continued on, even though I decided not to go back to school that fall semester. I decided in November, the end of November of 2020, to go for 100 miles. And believe me, I did not know what I was doing. I, again, did a 1 mile loop around my neighborhood. I didn't even know how to fuel properly. I had a cousin come over and give me um, liquid IV because I didn't know what electrolytes were. I was eating sandwiches at the towards the end of the race. I was eating pizza. Not that you can't eat pizza during an ultra, but I had no clue about fueling and things like that and pacing for a 100-mile race. I was just like, well, it worked once. I'm just going to do it again. And so I gathered together a bunch of friends, family, and one by one, I knocked out the miles. And this one, I raised money for childhood cancer research. So a really good cause, was able to raise this time a couple $1,000s. And a couple of the lessons that I learned from that are, I mean, running on pavement for 100 miles is tough. My feet by the end of it felt like they were broken or stress fractured. Another thing I learned was that I would each mile I'd check off one box on this whiteboard. And if you're doing that 100 times, it gets pretty demoralizing when you're only half the way there and you realize how tired you are and you still have 50 boxes to check. So I definitely wouldn't do that again. And then also how powerful it is to have a supporting crew and pacers. A pacer is someone who runs that journey with you, and those are so important because it's so hard to maintain focus. It's so hard because your brain starts to get real tired towards the end. So you need someone to be there alongside of you to push you and get you to keep going, as well as someone who's making sure you're eating, making sure you're hydrating, because your brain, imagine staying up for 24 hours, then put on top of that being on your feet for 12 to 24 hours. That's a lot, and then pair them together with running that much, yeah, you're gonna be exhausted and mentally fatigued. So it helps having someone there with a fresh brain to help you out. So that's that. Then the next thing I went on, so that was 2020. 2021, I ended up actually going out to work in Phoenix for a real estate education company in Phoenix, Arizona, and I really took a break from ultras. I did, if I recall correctly, I did an event called 29029 where you hike the vertical equivalents of summiting Mount Everest. That was a 36-hour challenge. I was able to knock it out in like 17 hours. And one of the really cool things, which I'll save for another video, is I met Steve Weatherford, my mentor, who I've been working for and with for 2 years. And so that was a really challenging event, but it was like 20 to 30 miles and 29,000 feet of elevation gain. So it wasn't much running. It was just more so the climbing that was exhausting. And then I did rim to rim to rim, which is 44 or so miles through the Grand Canyon, 10,000 feet of elevation gain, 10,000 feet of descent. One of the most beautiful runs that I've ever done, and highly recommend it. But if you don't know, 10,000 feet, that's a lot. And at some points, it was just like stairs. But after going through that year, I realized how much I missed ultra running and going and doing these impossible feats. And so during 2022, I signed up for three 100-mile races. And the reason I did this is because I wanted to qualify for a race called Badwater 135, one of the toughest, hardest, hottest ultramarathons in the United States, 135 miles through Death Valley. And so what I had to do was run three 100-mile races. So that year, I did the Keys 100, which was in May of 2022. Extremely hot, 80 degrees, 90% humidity to 100% humidity from Key Largo to Key West. It was so hot. I had no clue what I was doing. Other people had bandanas that they put ice in to keep them cool. I didn't know that even existed. And so I share that to say, I was failing forward. And with each race I did, I may not have been fully prepared in knowing exactly what to expect, but I knew I was going to learn in the process. And by this time, I actually found out and discovered the idea of hiring a coach for the race to help you prepare specifically for the event at hand, which was so helpful for me because one, it didn't make me second guess the training I was doing because the person that I had training me, I had confidence in. 2, they were able to think about things that I wasn't thinking about, and so they were able to suggest certain gear, certain, pacing strategies, fueling strategies, uh, electrolytes with the heat, all those things that were extremely, extremely helpful. And so those were 2 things, and then after that race, I did Leadville 100. That was a challenging race, running up at 13,000 feet and, 15,000 feet of gain and descent, Leadville, Colorado. It was absolutely beautiful, but a mountain race. And I lived in Texas at this time. So I had no mountains to train for. So that's just another encouragement to you that you don't need mountains to train for a mountain race. You can run on a treadmill, you can make do. Yes, it'd be nice to have mountains and trails, but it's not necessary. And, also another lesson I learned from that race is don't sprint down the hills because you'll blow up your quads, and by the end of the race, I was walking, and hardly hobbling at some points because my, my knee one of my knees kinda blew up on me, and it was really painful. But if I had paced myself, not just ripped it downhill, I would have been fine. But luckily, I had gotten through the first half of the race so fast that it didn't kill my time by blowing up there towards the end. So that was Leadville. Then I did an Ironman in October, and then later in December, I did um, the Brazos Bend 100 in Texas, Needville. It was another hotter one. I think it was 70, 80 degrees pretty much the whole time. So that was challenging. And then I heard about this thing on Instagram from a race director named Candace Burt, and she had a post that said 200 is the new 100. And I said, "So what do you mean about that?" And so I got tagged on to this company called Destination Trail Races with these 200-mile races, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, these things exist?" And so I was drawn in, and I found out that it was a lottery system because they had so many people wanting to try and get into these races, and they only had a limited number of spots, like 200 to 250 per race because the course and things like that. And so my thinking was like, hey, I'd rather guarantee my entry because they had this program that if you do all 3 and sign up for that, you can bypass the lottery. So I thought, man, I'd rather guarantee my entry than get put in the lottery and not make it. And so I ended up just paying for it all at once and going for these 200s. And I signed up for these 200s before I'd even run. Yeah, I believe it was before I'd even run the Keys, Leadville, and Brazos Bend. I signed up in May of 2022 for these 200s, which it was nuts because I had only done one 100, but that was the time when they were running this promotion during May of 2022. And so 2023 comes around and I end up also getting into another race called Ultraman Arizona, which is a 6.2-mile swim and 90-mile bike ride on the first day, a 171-mile bike ride on the second, and then a 52.4-mile run the third day. And I believe I got fourth place out of about 20 or so, youngest guy to do that. And then I went on in July, August, and October to run the Triple Crown of 200s. And from the start of the first to the final of the finish of the Moab was 3 months. And the first 2 races were only about 17 days apart, which was nuts. And I learned so much through that process. But there are a few things that I just want to highlight from that is number one, I hired a coach who had done those 3 races before because I figured that, man, if I want to do it, I need an expert to help guide me, right? Going back to what I said earlier, I'm not going to listen to someone who hasn't done it on something I want to do, right? Because they don't have that experience. And so I hired a coach named Mike McKnight who had actually won it. And that's another filter is I try and find the best of the best to help me do what I want to do. And I'm willing to make changes and sacrifice and things like that to be able to reach the goal. And so during 2023, I changed up my diet a lot. I did a low carb diet like Mike does. And I did this certain diet to help me get ready for these 200s. And then, man, during these 200s, I learned so much. I'll break it down in another video. But hiring a coach was huge. Changing my diet helped me recover faster. I wouldn't do a low carb diet for a marathon, but I would for an ultra marathon for or at least 200s because your heart rate's so low because you're running so far and your pace is pretty low. But I told you that I would share with you some of the things that I learned from Moab, the last race of the 200s, and it was supposed to be 40 miles, but my watch ended up clocking 250 miles, and that was what happened with each of these races. Tahoe was supposed to be 206, it ended up being 221. Bigfoot was supposed to be 208, and it was 214 just 17 days later after Tahoe. I'll throw in there too that after I finished Tahoe, because I almost quit at mile 60 and my crew thought I was going to be done at mile 100, like I almost quit twice. And they're like, they didn't even think I was going to go for it with Bigfoot. And I honestly, the day after I finished Tahoe, I didn't know I was going to go for it either. But it's just so crazy what we're able to accomplish. So many things, even though we may not think we can at the time. So that was Tahoe and Bigfoot. And then, yeah, like I said, Moab was supposed to be 239 miles, but it ended up being 250. And there's so much I learned from these races, so much wisdom I gained. But really, I wanted to make this video to show you the progression that I went through from 5K to 250-mile race so that you could glean some of the lessons I learned, but more importantly, see the process over the course of 5 years from September of 2018 to October of 2023 on how I went from 5K to 250-mile race. And there was about a year in the middle there where I didn't really do any ultras except I mean, I did 29.029 and rim to rim to rim, but they weren't like impossible feats that I was going after. So I could have, I guess, maybe done it in 4 or less. But there was a progress and progression of like doing a little bit more at a time. But I see on the internet and I've heard from people, some people saying you needed 10 years of running experience to run 100 miles and things like that. And that's just bogus. Like I trained a guy to go from 0 to 100 in about 6 to 8 months. Granted, he worked hard. Granted, he was a fit guy before, but just hadn't run at all. And we did 1 mile loop on pavement and stuff like that. But I wanted to share that to show that it is possible, and hopefully you glean something from this. And that's why I share some of the stuff I do is because I've learned a lot and I would just want to give back because I wish someone would have shared with me their running progression so I could have seen the steps that they took and the lessons that they learned to get to where they are today. So thanks for watching this one, and we'll see you next time.